It's the No Last Race podcast with Mick and Louis, brought to you by Tiakau, New Zealand's champion racing stable.
Yes, Michael Guerin, Tiakau Racing, Toby in the corner, Louis who and what it is, No Last Race, back again.
How are you, Hyphen? Are you good?
I am very good. We're back for another Group 1 week.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Like, I'm looking forward to not only what's going to happen at Hastings on Saturday, because we've got Melody Bell back, which throws a rather large spannerish thing in the works, and we've also got Two Illicit joining the party from the Tarzino, which was tough enough a couple of weeks ago, but also Probabil's racing in the Epsom, and those races don't come along every day. It's $1 million Aussie, and she's got a real chance even from a tough barrier draw. So Tiakau have bizarrely 3 Karaka Million winners racing in the space of 2 hours in Group 1. So with those age group sales races, often they're low-hanging fruit and the horses don't go on with it. But Melody Bell, Avantage, and obviously Probabil have really embellished the Karaka Million because they've said, hey, you can win these at 2 and still develop into a good horse. So that's really important for the sales. So it's an interesting weekend for everybody involved with those horses.
Mick, it's storyline city out here. There's so much going on. Later in the show, we're going to look at the Windsor Park Plate, the Group 1. Oh, I can't wait. And hell of a race. Before then, we're going to talk about tracks, and we're going to get a little bit of punting knowledge on tracks.
And jockeys. We're going to talk about jockeys, which is really interesting.
2 very important things. The person on top of the horse and the literal ground that the horse is running on. So we're going to get into that today. I'm looking forward to that. You didn't come back with the scarf.
No. Look, I tried the scarf last time. I had some negative comments.
Did you see them? Did they make them back to you? Because I didn't pass them on. I couldn't do it.
I'm not on Facebook, so I didn't see them. But people told me, and that's fair. Fair to say, I might have overstepped the mark there.
I don't know, mate. I'm glad. Look, all I can say is I'm glad you've worked it out on your own.
You don't see a lot of scarves in the racing community.
You don't.
Maybe Michael Walker might try and wear one, but no. There's not many in the New Zealand racing community. Unless we're talking those Invercargill type scarves, which are slightly different.
That's very, very different, Mick. Okay, so at the end of the episode, we're also going to touch in. We're going to start a new segment where we're going to look at. We'll call them Tiakau's treasures. Yep. They're going to give us a horse or 2 each week, each episode to focus in on that we'll be racing in the next kind of couple of weeks afterwards.
And there's a couple of nice ones later on, and we'll go through one of the trials of one of the horses involved and show you why it was a good trial, because it might help you with your own analysis heading forward.
That's exactly right. And I think last episode we spoke about they were about to get they were trying to get their awards off the ground. The NZTR ones have been sent online. They've got it coming. So in a couple of weeks' time, on a Sunday, they're going to throw their own party. So again, that's what you get when you're dealing with the Tiakau team. Let's cut straight into it. I'm going to start with a bit of news, and this is where we get into the jockeys. In Sydney and Melbourne at the moment, there's this real tug of war in Sydney and Melbourne, isn't there? 2 big behemoths in the Southern Hemisphere racing world. The Everest and the Caulfield Cup. Well, the Everest, Peter V'landys, they've swung in and they've put this huge stake and this massive sprint race on the same day as the old prestigious Caulfield Cup. And it's meant that if you're a jockey, I mean, you obviously can't be in the same city at once, but now with COVID restrictions and having to isolate going into Melbourne for 5 days at a time, it's probably not as easy as it once was to just be able to swing between states. So jockey movement in Australia, and especially if you want to follow a jockey this time around, it's a bit different, isn't it, Mick?
Well, for the leading Sydney jockeys, once they go to Victoria, they've pretty much got to stay there, more or less. They've got a 5-day quarantine once they get there, but then again, it's a lot harder to get back because Victoria is, unfortunately, a COVID state at the moment, and New South Wales is not. So what a lot of jockeys are doing, like Hugh Bowman, is riding this week, and then you say, here's my options. Do I have a winning chance in the Everest? And these guys know the form better than anybody. If not, do I have a winning chance in the Caulfield Cup? One's 15, one's 5 or 6, and I'll go wherever I can get the best money. Now, that relationship is based around a whole ream of things, which trainer you ride for the most, how informed his team is. For example, Hugh Bowman's committed to a couple of horses for Coolmore, and they're serious global players, so they're people you want to be in bed with because they're going to have horses coming out for these big races all the time. And also you say to yourself, if I'm not going to win the Everest, what else on the day matters to me? A lot of this also, the jockeys they like to ride for Arrowfield, they like to ride for Coolmore, they like to ride for big players. So even if you could ride G-Trash, would you care as much because that syndicate's probably not going to rock up with 100 more horses? So jockeys and why they ride horses is never as simple as, is this the best ride in this race? Because sometimes their commitments go back years, going forward years, and they're looking for what's going to be sustainable longer. Last year, for example, James McDonald had a couple of options in the Cox Plate, but he ended up riding Very Elegant because his association with Chris Waller is incredibly important to him and will therefore get him a lot of winners over potentially the next 10 or 20 years. So even though he had other options, he could have ridden Tiaka Shark, who finished ahead of Very Elegant. He actually made the right choice, even though he made less money on the day.
So it's very complex. It's not just best jockey. The alpha jockey gets the best ride in the race. There's so many elements to it. And actually here in New Zealand this weekend, we've got a really kind of bizarre scenario where Troy Harris, he's getting one of the most coveted rides in racing this weekend when he hops on Melody Bell. Danielle sticks with Avantage. Opie's on the higher weight Prise de Fur. Yeah. And Troy's found himself now on Melody Bell, which is quite a staggering situation.
Well, 3 weeks ago, we didn't think she was coming back, and now Troy's on it. Troy is a class rider, very well-balanced rider, but Danielle's ridden Avantage to win 3 Group 1s or 2 Group 1s at Mar and a Group 2, but she's had a really good run on the horse, so she'll naturally stick with that. And Opie, I think, not only likes Prix de Feu as a horse, but they're thinking it could be a Livermore winning ride, whereas Melody Bell, she could win this week and go to the Livermore. She could run down the track this week, run a 4th or a 5th, which for her is down the track, and maybe they ease up and go to a Captain Cook. So Troy has got the 3rd of the options, even though she could even go close to starting favourite.
It is so complex because then you look at the odds, and Melody Bell's only 2nd favourite, just I think 30 cents
also,
off.
It comes down to weight. Like, it's easier for Opie to ride at 59 at this stage of the season. He'll be able to ride at 55, 54 and a half by the time we get to Karaka Million Night. But it's summer, of course. So at 59, he feels more comfortable, and this week isn't an absolute pain for him. Whereas if he gets down to 57 to ride Avantage, that might mentally or physically affect him. And we've seen a little bit of that recently with a couple of jockeys standing themselves down or being stood down, depending on who you're willing to listen to. The thing about jockeys is this. You have to be extremely light to be a jockey. And jockeys, like most people I know, like to drink piss. Yeah. They like to have a beer because they're quite fun people, and they tend to have quite a large adrenaline thresholds because they do a very adrenaline-filled job.
But because they're nutcases. Sorry.
You can't, well, you have to be crazy to do it for a job. But you can't drink beer, a lot of beer, and be a jockey unless you weigh about 50 kgs. So what you do find is that if these jockeys want to go out and have a good time, like every normal human being on earth is allowed to do, it impacts their business. Whereas if someone listening to this is a plumber and he cuts himself in half on Saturday night on the jar, well, he can still go to work on Monday morning. So it's really tough on the jockeys, and you start getting into these problems where people do use piss pills or they throw up and flipping, what they call it, when they chuck up a lot, and you get really dehydrated. And it's a job which, even if I could ride, I simply wouldn't do because it's so hard on people's bodies. And sometimes people take pot shots at jockeys and say, oh, well, you know, if they were a foot taller, they'd be cleaning toilets and all that rubbish. Well, that's actually not quite that simple. So I think then you have jockey managers. You have, I said, all those obligations around what horses you want to ride for what people. Sometimes you've got to ride the wrong horse for the right guy because he also owns the best other horse. It's a complicated matrix, which is why I think it's really important good jockeys have good people around them, because a lot of these kids started when they're 15, 16.
Yeah, young.
And they get into a really high-powered job. If you were an All Black in that situation, you would have a manager. And some jockeys don't have financial managers, and some of our jockeys in New Zealand don't even have managers, which is really odd. So, I've got nothing but admiration for them, even though sometimes they do dumb things.
Look, there's this weekend in particular. It's a great. This is why we're talking about the jockeys, because there's some sublime movement, and it's staggering. One race in particular, John O'Shaw's got in touch with the show, and he wanted to know what was going on with Funstar in the Epsom. Now, this wasn't too hard to work out once we had a look at the weights. So Funstar is on a low weight,
52.5.
52.5, the same as Probabile. Yep. Kieran McAvoy is a low weight rider, and so is Glenn Boss. So James McDonald, who usually partners Funstar, couldn't have got there anyway. Now, James is riding Imaging, which I first thought was odd because I watched Colding Imaging looked like it was going to run past Colding last start and didn't. Now I thought, oh, well, he would go on, great partnership with Chris Waller. Hugh Bowman's partner in Colding, and we did a little bit of digging for Jono. That's because Hugh has, and you can work this stuff out. If you're willing to go back and put in the time, you can usually figure this stuff out. It does usually make sense. So Hugh rode Colding last prep quite a bit, when he actually wasn't at his best. But he obviously is now back to his best. Tricky draw. Those draws are just bonkers, actually. They've all drawn the car park. Now, Nash Rawiller is on Star of the Seas. Now, that is what happens when an owner actually says, I want this jockey. And that's something else that can happen. And there we find James McDonald on Imaging, because he's won on Imaging before, so obviously can partner the horse. So in a race like that, there you go. You've got 4 or 5 different things happening, and the jigsaw kind of sorts itself out.
Well, and also, $1 million sounds an awful lot of money. And I think the winning stake's $580,000. If a jockey's on 5%, they get $29K. But over the course of James McDonald's lifetime, he's not going to go to war with Chris Waller for $29,000. So if Chris says, mate, can you ride this? He'll just say, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And so will Hugh, and so will everybody else. The dice. Now, they have jockeys managers. Those guys all have jockeys managers. And they would be, some of these things would be done weeks in advance. Sometimes they're done in the last week, because you don't know a horse like Yes, who won the Everest last year, is going to be in the race. So then you need to scramble to get a jockey who can ride at that weight. And, of course, 5 or 6 of the best jockeys are gone. So it's a really intriguing game that plays out. When you deal with the biggest punters, the ones who deal with algorithms, the jockey's one of the key elements they put in.
Yeah.
And particularly jockey form. Now, at the moment, I think both Matt Cameron and Danielle are riding really well in New Zealand. And even if I see them, I'll add a tick. So if I like a horse 7 out of 10, I'll add 8, make it an 8, because they're riding so well. And jockeys, like everybody else in life, goal kickers, cricketers, golfers, also get the yips and go through low periods. And that's another thing you also factor in. Owners jump off jockeys really quickly. You know, so it's an interesting mix of dynamic. But at the end of the day, if you're betting in Sydney, in the Epsom, it's pretty likely everybody in the race can ride.
That's right.
And that's the same as the Group 1 this week at Hawke's Bay. The top 20 riders in New Zealand are very good. The problem is, once you get outside that top 20, the difference between the 40th rider and Opie is enormous, whereas the difference between, I'm just going to grab a name off the top of my head, Rosie Myers, who might sometimes sit as low as 15th on the premiership, and Opie isn't that big, because they're both Group 1 winning riders. So I think that's a crucial factor, is have they got experience at Group 1? Because if they haven't, that's a really difficult situation to walk into.
Which is why, I mean, Sean Ritchie just must have been pinching himself with joy when he looked at the sheet and Matt Cameron hadn't been assigned a ride after Jason Waddell was scratched from the first Group 1 of the year.
And he wrote Jennifer Eccles a treat. And that's the other thing too. Often trainers will blame a jockey after a race for what they perceived to be a bad ride, because it's just a lot easier than going back to your owners and saying this thing wasn't fit enough. and that's not blaming anybody, because jockeys will also blame trainers. So it's a weird dynamic of a game. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the only people really happy are the people who win.
Yes.
Because everybody else has to come up with an excuse or something.
100. You're so right. And that's I completely relate to that. So if you're watching along now or you're listening along, get in touch. Let us know in the comments. Do you love following jockey form? Do you analyse jockey form? What do you like when you want to see a jockey? Do you prefer to back a jockey at a certain way? I'll be really interested to know what people kind of take into account before.
I'll tell you what's amazing is how much the jockeys' personalities will change on a big day. Like on a smaller day, people can be grumpy because they've had to waste really hard. No one wastes harder than Jonathan Riddell, who won the first Group 1 of the season 2 weeks ago. And other times it's cold or it's wet or they're not dialed in. But you go to Ellerslie for those big days. Karaka Million, Derby Day, Cup Day, Boxing Day. And it's the jockeys are different people. Like, they're always fun to be around. I enjoy jockeys' company, but they are dialed in. And you can see them. They are
focused.
And it's, some people do it in a relaxed way. Some people do it in a real laser beam way. But you can feel, tension's not the right word, you can feel the anticipation in the jockey's room and being around them. So, as I said, I've got nothing but respect for them, because very, very few people on earth can do what they do. Like, technically I could drive a rally car. I couldn't drive a rally car fast, but I could drive a rally car. And technically,
could you get it into the car park downstairs?
Exactly. And technically I could work on an America's Cup boat. I wouldn't be any good at it. But very, very, very few people on earth can be jockeys. You have to be 55 kilos and able to ride a horse. So that cuts most people out pretty quickly.
Technically, I could wear a pink scarf, but I saw what they said about you, and
you definitely shouldn't try that.
No, I should not.
It's the No Last Race podcast with Mick and Louis, brought to you by Tiakau, New Zealand's champion racing stable.
All right, we've got through jockeys. Coming up after this, we're going to look at the hell of a race, then we're going to get to a couple of Tiakau treasures that will point you in the right direction for next week at Avondale. Tracks. I think this is so important for this time of year. We had a very, very nice early spring in September in Auckland, and all of a sudden on Ellerslie the track was lovely and pretty much dry. And I think around the country now people are starting to pay huge attention to tracks. I think it's a great topic to get into this week in particular, Mick. I guess where should we start here? Do you have maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 very key points when you evaluate track before you put a bet on? What do you want to know? Or if you watch the first race, what are you looking for? How do you want to approach it?
A totally different thing for what we're getting into now for what we've been getting into for the last 3 months. Whereas it's just been a race to the outside for lots of tracks, and it's a shit version of racing. It really is.
It's pretty grim.
Everybody knows it's shit.
Yeah, it's grim.
And once the tracks get firm or firmish, a lot of people talk about track bias. Well, the simple thing is this. If the track is firm and the track is exactly the same from the inside to the outside, which to a degree it should be, it doesn't always work that way because often trials are held wide on the track. Well, yes, there's a gigantic track bias because the inside is clearly going to be better. Anytime you run a race in a circle, and anybody who did athletics at school would know this.
Just watch the Olympics, yeah.
Exactly. The inside is the shortest way home. Mm-hmm. So often, for example, last week at Ellerslie, the leaders were winning from almost all the time. It was a horse who came from well back in the field, but it's a pretty good horse. Now, the leaders were hacking up in front, getting away from them and winning. Well, people would say, well, the inside was red hot, but the inside is always red hot if the track is even because it's the shortest way home. That's why in the Olympics, the guy on the inside lane in the 400 metres is about 50 metres behind the guy on the outside lane. So often people will blame that, but you've just got to factor that into your betting. Now, particularly on the first day of a carnival at Hawke's Bay, for example, the horse who won the big race, Call Sign Mav, on the speed, as we said it could be, up and in, and the track's firm and they run away and win.
Yep.
And people sometimes say, oh, the inside's on and it's all that. But what were you expecting to happen? Once you had a firm surface, so therefore it wasn't deteriorating from the inside that much, and therefore wasn't disadvantageous, it's going to be advantageous because the horses coming wider are going to cover more ground. Now, that's particularly on the first day of carnivals and particularly when you have high-class racing because if Catalyst sits last in a maiden race, it's going to run past the rest of the field. But once you have Group 1 horses up there running 110s, 1.9s, or in the case of the last week at the Tarzina, 122 for the 1400, you're not going to run past them very often.
But, okay, so some days on a good track, and let's say use this weekend for example. It's a nice, good track, and sometimes you just watch it play even. Horses can come from back off the speed and come flying home around the outside. So how do you determine that? What are you looking for?
Well, the crucial thing's tempo related. Like even time for gallopers, and we're talking about maiden gallopers because obviously good horses go faster, is 112 for 1200 metres, 124 for 1400 metres, 136 for a mile. So obviously the good horses take a couple of seconds off those times. But if they're going even time and therefore all the horses are going at a nice even rate and they're happy in their breathing, then being in front's an advantage and being on the rail's an advantage. But if they're breaking speeds, if they're going 1.9 time for maiden 1200 metre horses, which is too fast for them, then yes, you can swoop. So you need to look at the track and take it with the times, using even time as what you're looking at and say, okay, they are swooping today and they can or can't. And also jockeys are the best people to judge it because they're out there all the time.
Yes.
So you look for where they're looking to go. So track bias is a really interesting thing because people often call it track bias when any circle that anything races on, the inside is always advantageous until it gets worn later in a carnival or gets wet when obviously it chops up and therefore the more horses race on it during the day. It probably won't affect you quite as much in the spring, in the summer, but at the moment it's really important to look at because we're also getting a lot of racing back on tracks that have had rails out a long way because of winter. We're going to places like Ruakaka again where all of a sudden horses haven't raced there for 6 or 7 months. And just try and look at it and think, look, it's not going to affect most of your betting, but what you don't want to do is be backing horses drawn wide if the inside's the place to be, or horses drawn the inside if it gets wet and they're having to try and work to the outside of the track because they're also trying to keep up with the other horses while making those movements sideways. So that you're looking for anything which is against a pattern for the day is something that makes you think twice about your bet.
How much do you have to determine the horse that you like in kind of comparison with or kind of in conjunction with the track? So say you want to back a Probabile who likes to get back and come swooping around them. So if then the track is playing, well, you know, just as you say, the shortest way home, it's not the track's not on or off, that's just the math, isn't it? Then do you have to say, look, maybe today I'm just not going to have a bet. But if you really like Probably and everything else stacks up, but just her style of racing or the horse that you want to punt, their style of racing doesn't match, is it just as simple as stay away?
Crucial's tempo. Do you think there'll be tempo? This week's an Epsom, so there's 20 horses in it, so not everybody's going to go back. And horses are going to want to roll forward, and some of them aren't going to race for $1 million again anytime soon. So you would expect some tempo in this race, whereas often in a lead-up type race, a horse like Dreamforce jumps to the lead, hacks around, doesn't get attacked because no one wants to give their horse a headache, and it runs away. So Rose Hill is a lot easier to lead on under a lead-up race, a Chipping Norton, than it is at Randwick and an Epsom where you get a bigger field, more movement and more pressure. So it's not always a case of only backing the horses on the speed, because if there's going to be pressure in the race, that will change. But if you think Randwick is playing fair on Everest Day, and if you think there's no guarantee Nature Strip is going to lead, not as guaranteed as maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago before the crazy trials, then you're thinking, well, that's probably going to be an advantageous place to be, as it was for Red Zell when it won its 2 Everests.
Yep.
And if you start backing against horses that as much as you love them, you may love a horse like Santa Ana Lane, but you want to back it coming from back in the field, that's going to end in disappointment more often than it's not. Doesn't mean you should never do it, but it's going to end. And if you genuinely think to yourself, well, I love Santa Ana Lane, well, love it a bit less. Just parry your bet back a little bit, watch it and love it, and if it wins, think, I'm glad the horse won.
Okay, we talked in the first episode of No Last Race about level 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're a level 4 punter or a level 3 punter kind of starting to angle towards level 4 punting, or you're just a level 3 punter, you know, you're probably going to be wanting to put your bets on, I think it's 9 o'clock in Australian time. That's where we spoke to Jack Dickens on the bottomless punt, and he said between 9 and 9:10 in Aussie time, that's where all the serious punters punt. If you want to bet at an opening market, say today you want to have a bet in the Windsor Park Plate, how much of that do you actually need to double think about? Because weather, track conditions, if you want to have a serious bet on a horse, say in race 8 or 9, how often are you waiting until you've seen the track play?
Well, today I would have waited because they raced at Tauranga today on the Wednesday, and it came up a 7, but I'm pretty sure it was going to get to a 5. There was good wind and it was a hot day. And it was a drying track. It was heading this way rather than heading that way. So I would wait till later in the day, because sometimes you don't get that greater odds spoil anyway. Often the Australian punters will have their speed maps and their track analysis done, so they want to get on when they think the best odds are available, because they're terrified the algorithm punters are going to get there in front of them and it's going to chew the odds up. But for someone like Hawke's Bay this weekend, it's not that big a deal. Unless it's going to rain on the day, you pretty much know what you're going to get. One thing you might do, though, is they raced 2 weeks ago, so the inside might be a little bit more tuned up than, say, 4 or 5 metres out. If I'm going to have a magical figure, say I'm going to have 5,000 on Avantage, so it means enough to me that I'm going to be really angry if I get beat or I may not be able to trade out of it, then I'll wait. Because you're dealing with serious money. The other thing too is, never forget this, on tab.co.nz, you can often put a bet on and for 5% take it off. You can cash out. Now, some people hate cashing out, but I backed a horse, I can't remember his name. Last year when Avantage won the Hanui Farm Classic down at Otaki, I backed a horse, a good mare, Volpe Veloce. I backed Volpe Veloce and was really happy. I got $6.50 or whatever it was. Really happy, knowing it was going to be a dry track. It started to rain in Otaki, got wet. By Saturday, traded out of the bet. Cost me 5%. I think I had 500 each one or something. So it cost me $50 to trade out of it. Well, that's what you can do. If you want to take the early odds, you always have the option to trade out of it as long as the market hasn't moved too much because of some major scratching. So be aware of those things. But often people who go looking for the best value are trying to be too smart for their own good.
There you go. There's tracks. It's a timely reminder. I mean, this time of year it's so exciting, but it is important to know your stuff when it comes to tracks. So hopefully you found that handy. Anything else, or can we move on? One
of the crucial things is when you're looking at trials, left and right-handed.
Yep.
Often horses trial good left-handed, don't race well right-handed. It's a vastly different thing. It's not always the case, but I always like to backing a horse who's trialled the way it's going to race, or raced accordingly.
Interesting.
Because nothing worse than, and Ellerslie crucial for it. Ellerslie often, when you come around the corner at Ellerslie, it's a big, wide open straight, really big open expanse.
Yep.
And a lot of horses come around that corner and get lost. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And especially 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
And Dragon Leap last year.
And that's why those lead-up races into the Karaka Million are so important.
So that's, you want a horse who's been there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can factor in when you're talking tracks. They also go 2 different ways in this country, whereas most horses in Sydney race pretty much mainly in Sydney or New South Wales, unless they're really, really good, and all the tracks go the other way. So we have a lot of tracks. We have Te Rapa and Ellerslie, our two biggest tracks, and Matamata alongside them, go in totally different directions from each other. Well, that's important.
Yeah, it is important. All right, there you go. Go have a look. Don't get caught out.
No last race. It's Mick's hell of a race with Hell Pizza.
Must say, it's the end of September today, which means there is literally, you're watching this and you're hungry, so go order a pizza, a Hell Pizza. This is the last day that you can use the you get an unholy donut, and with Hell Pizza, we've talked about it, the Neonatal Trust. They're trying to raise $66,666. If they raise more than that, I'm sure they'll be thrilled. This is Hell Pizza I'm talking about. This will help premature babies and families through their tough neonatal journey. So neonatal, and they don't receive any government funding, and this is crazy. They rely purely on donations, fundraisers, and grants. So today's the last day. Get a pizza, get an unholy donut, be a good person.
On the subject of governments,
I thought we were going to be a subject of being a good person.
No, not a good person, but I do love pizza. In my job as racing editor for the Herald, which is actually going really well, having racing in the paper every day has been quite encouraging for me anyway, and I hope people are enjoying it when they do read it. I've actually written to not only Winston Peters an email, but also to the two other people I potentially see being the new Minister for Racing under a different government setup. I have no opinion on that, and I'm not getting involved.
McKelvey and McNulty?
Other people I wrote to. And said, look, here's the 5 key questions I see for New Zealand racing. Would you like to answer them? So Winston got back to me today, Mr. Peters, I should say, and said, I'll be answering these.
Yes.
I hope the other 2 gentlemen do too. I have no political allegiances to anybody involved. Yes. And then the Herald will release an article of all their answers alongside each other so people can, at least, if racing's going to influence your vote, and I'm not saying whether it should or not, but if that is going to influence your vote, there should be a story in the Herald in the next 10 days where those 3 gentlemen have a chance to say what they would do with New Zealand racing heading forward.
What were you doing? Why didn't you just watch the 3 podcasts we did with them? And you could have just, we just did the work for you.
I could have, but then again, I have a totally separate audience and I'm getting paid by the Herald.
Oh, right.
And I need money.
You need to do your own work, right?
Yeah, okay. I can't just put in the Herald, please watch podcasts.
Go to CBGP podcast. No, Ian McKelvey and Kieran McAnulty were both really good dudes.
Kieran McAnulty used to be a bookie.
Kieran, hey, go watch the podcast. Go watch the podcast. It's a good podcast.
You're not supposed to point at people.
Sorry. No, he came across really well. No. He's a younger dude. He loves his racing. Yeah. He thinks it's important that gambling isn't vilified. He wants to kind of, he gets it.
Some days I wish gambling was vilified.
Yeah. Oh.
We've all been there on a Saturday night.
We have all. Okay, look, it's a hell of a race time. We've danced around it enough. Mick, this is a bit trickier than the first Group 1, the Tarzino Trophy. We've got the Windsor Park Plate up to a mile now. We have 3 Tangerine. We've got Avantage. We've got Melody Bell. The favourite as we record is Avantage, $3.40 to Melody Bell's $3.70. We've got Sapira. We've got Jenny Eccles. We've got a really nice mare to Illicit.
Yeah, she's a good mare.
This is a bit tougher, isn't it?
And Melody Bell. Funny enough, I was absolutely convinced a mare would win the Tarzino, and well done to John Barry. Fantastic training effort to get Coolside Mav to win the race fresh up. I didn't see that coming at all. They were up and in, but he still had to win. It's hard to go past these mares this week. Coolside Mav's there again, but there's so much depth in those mares, and I really liked Avantage, as people know from the podcast, as a great futures bet. And we managed to get on her each way, so it wasn't a disaster. But before the start of that race, when they were dicking around on the gates,
it's tough to watch.
I looked up at the heavens and went, this is screwed, this thing. This is screwed. Yeah. And I had it going for 5 figures.
It was tough to watch.
And you just knew it was. Now, they've taken the barrier blanket off her because mares often hate having anything around their hindquarters. They're naturally suspicious of that area of their body. So she looked just irritated. She looked pissed off by the entire thing. And they've taken the barrier blanket off her and they've put a hood on her, which is totally dark. So she walks in there and then they take the hood off and off she goes. So that hopefully will keep her calmer. But I still thought, and I thought this in the first race at Te Rapa, the Foxbridge Plate, I thought she sort of ground to the line. She didn't come out and go bang, which is not easy to do. I'm not going to go crazy on her at 340. I think Melody Bell could win, but gee, it's a big ask. She's been to a lot of places in the last 2 or 3 months.
Her Sydney form in that last race, the Wink Stakes was the last race, wasn't it? It was inconclusive. If you want to watch that race and you want to say, oh, she just got cheeked at the wrong time, she was about to bound clear, you could probably talk yourself into it. But at the same time, she probably didn't look as good as she has looked second up in that race. It's tough. It's really hard to read, isn't it?
It is, and the trial she won at Rotorua wasn't a deep trial by any means. So look, either of them could win easily, but I have no reason to think going into Saturday they're any better than Two Illicit. Like, Two Illicit on a track which was against her was just outstanding.
What a ride from Leaf.
At Ellerslie. And all these horses are bunched in together. Like, I think Jennifer Eccles, Avantage, Melody Bell and Two Illicit are drawn next to each other.
Yep, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Which potentially, I mean, mapping fields is always difficult, but potentially gives them the chance to track each other. So if one's ahead of the other, then the other one's going to be too far away from them.
Yep.
I thought Jennifer Eccles was okay to good in the Tarzana. By no means anything wrong with the run, but I thought Two Illicit's return in a far weaker field was at least as good, if not better. I think if they go hard, Two Illicit can come off the back of the Te Akau horses and beat them. I'm not saying that will happen, but I think she can, and I think her $6 is at least as much value as $3.40 for Avantage. Melody Bell, I'm happy to watch, and if she wins, go, wow, that's fantastic, Group 1, number 11. But I simply can't back her because I don't know enough of the ponderables. Jamie tells me this week she looks happy, she's well on herself. Maybe we'll feel like fools after the race because she's won so many good ones. But I can't remember it happening very often when we've had a horse. She didn't technically go to Sydney because she spelled there, but come back from Sydney to New Zealand, having raced in a Sydney spring, back to a New Zealand spring to win a Group 1, maybe later in the spring, but it would very, very, really happy. Sunline raced and won the Princess Series, I think it was still called that back then, and came back and won a race in New Zealand. But she wouldn't have come back in mid-September. So it's early October is just going to be. It's a really huge challenge for her.
It's a tough race, and I'm almost.
Did you have a view?
I'm almost thinking I would actually feel better backing Two Illicit at $2.25 than I would be to be backing one of the Te Akau mares to win.
$2.25 a place.
Yeah.
I think so. I think she's got a great chance, and I think she's also going to be better for the Livermore. But it's almost moving day because Melody Bell fails here. I'm sure she doesn't go to the Livermore. Avantage wins here. Great. They think Livermore, in the back of their minds, they're thinking the Matriarch or something in Melbourne if it's possible. Two Illicit comes out and wins this. All of a sudden, she's favourite for the Livermore. Same for Jennifer Eccles. And then you say, where do the boys fit into this? And, of course, Sapira was unlucky, running second to Tarzino, and she'll definitely cop the 2,000. So there could be a totally different look, not only to the Livermore, but to the spring after what we see on Saturday.
You're so right. It just shapes up, as I said, storyline city. It just shapes up as an absolute ripper. It's a Group 1.
Not everybody can be happy, that's for sure.
No, that's right. Someone has to win and someone has to lose. And then I'm thinking, actually, Jennifer Eccles at $9 and $3, like I could easily talk myself into that.
Well, I don't think she'll shorten. Not with the Australian money for Melody Bell. Avantage we know well, and Two Illicit's got a lot of fans. I don't see Jennifer Eccles getting any shorter than that because she didn't run top 3 last time. So there's not people going, wow, I was unlucky, I'm going to reinvest. So I think I think the market's relatively right, but I do think Two Illicit's a horse who could potentially shorten because most times punters are backed her in their life. She's run first or second.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good memories there.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Okay, that is a hell of a race. Who are you backing, guys? Comment. Let us know who you're backing.
Why?
And why? Because I'm
always wonder when I say to people on a racetrack, who do you like? I want to know why.
Yeah.
I want to know what goes through their mind to come up with this conclusion. And some people it literally is, I love Jennifer, in which case that's fine. But it's always interesting to see why people think something's going to happen.
That is exactly right, Mick. And tell us why, because my heart is up for this one. I don't actually know. I'm probably going to have another. We got the All-In Challenge again this week. We're looking to have even
$100 a person
bigger,
or 200?
Yeah, $100 a person. We're going to have even a bigger pool. There's almost 200 tickets gone already. So actually there probably is by the time we're on here. So look, this is a great day of racing, and this race in particular, I am very, very excited about. That is a hell of a race.
No last race. It's Mick's Hell of a Race with Hell Pizza.
All right, Mick. Exciting times. Te Akau, who proudly sponsor this fine establishment and show, They are very good to us.
They didn't send any pizza though.
No,
The other bloke sent pizza.
The other one sent no.
Toby will not be happy.
No, Toby wasn't. I told him. Tiaka, they get their face on the wall because they do a great job, meaning that we can be here. Now, we've thought, what can we do that can spice up this relationship a little bit? Jamie, the young godfather, he just, sits there. He's very serious. He praises his horses so
Well,
seriously.
He doesn't sleep enough.
He doesn't sleep. He gets up at 2:30 and goes to bed at 9:30. So I was thinking, how can we tap in to Tiaka Racing and kind of make the most out of this for them and for us?
And get the boys and girls a winner.
That is it.
We all need coin.
So, with that in mind, today, our first edition of Tiaka's Treasures, we're going to look at 2 horses to follow, and both of these horses are slated to potentially, no, not exactly, but probably, we'll say probably, be racing next Wednesday at Avondale. Now, this is good. You're gonna watch this tonight, and you'll see it, and then we'll repurpose this clip out. So you will have kind of the inside running to get on these horses if you want to, if you're impressed enough, Mick. We're going to start with this horse here. All right,
Sophisticato,
if I can get my
he's the son of
fancy
Burgundy.
machine.
Before we get kicking into this, here's the crucial part for this.
You gotta
take my mic with me.
Just
Here we
stand
go.
there and use your hand, mate. Should we go?
So you got a horse who's drawn the outside.
Yes.
Outside barrier in trials. Trials are dominated by inside drawn horses. They jump, they sort of settle.
Yep.
No one goes too crazy.
Can I play it?
You look at this. You're looking for the horse on the outside in the tangerine colours. We know the colours well. Now, he's had a bit of a dip there out of the gates. This is at Rotorua at the trials. And yet, even though he's wide and he's had to shy away from another horse, he's in for the fight. Often 2-year-olds in the situation throw their head in the air. I don't really know what's going on. I'm sick of it. But this is a horse under a nice rein. It's following around pretty well. Head goes in the air a bit here. What you're going to like is this. He's been 3 wide for the entire trip, the son of Burgundy.
Yes.
Watch his head go down here in the last 100 metres. This is a horse who wants to be there. So the inside horse is holding back. It's kicking back. No, stretching again, stretching, wants to be there, head down, not mucking around. It wants to be a racehorse. Now, in a trial, if you're stuck wide, 3 wide out to 2 wide, and you still want to be there, that's really important because it means that if you could ever find the fence, you know exactly what to do. So typical of a barn that has a lot of good horses, they can work with those horses. This is a well-schooled 2-year-old, would have learned a lot from that, but showed in the last 100 metres rather than dicking around or not wanting to run through any potential pain barrier, it wanted to be there. So this is a horse you know is going to turn up to the races. If it's good enough, who knows? You don't know the quality of the horses behind it, but it's going to want to be there and it's going to probably do things right.
Okay, there you go. So that's the first one, Sophisticato. Look, Jamie said, as I said, we've got to get Jamie's appraisal on this stuff. This young fella's trialled well, and there is race form around him. So that is what we're looking at there. The next one, well, we've actually got a proper race here. This is Carmelas, and this is it. You'll notice the colours. This is a Brendan and Joe Lindsay owned. She's a filly. Darcy Brahma, who's been to the races once. This is it, Mick. What can we watch?
Looking for the horse out wide in those famous, they're the same probable colours.
Yes.
And we've seen the Karaka Million a couple of times. And Taupo's a brutal track to be stuck wide on because it very much is a greyhound track. They get hard up against the rail and they really power up and they love it. Mm-hmm. Now, the winning form out of this race is a horse called No Filter.
That's right.
Who's from a stable that's really in form. They're peaking their maidens nicely. So you're looking around the form for the horse who's stuck 3 wide. So basically, it's just got to sit there. It's got nowhere to go. You can't push the button. There's no point attacking any further. So you're trapped and you're losing ground. Every 100 metres here, you're losing half a length. So you're having to go faster and faster. So around about now, Lee's got to push the button. He's got to get out of here. He's coming really wide. And often a horse in this situation, again, not the trial before, they'll shirk. They'll put their head in the air. They've had enough. It was just a bit of a dick around.
Yep.
And the jockey will ease up. But the horse who comes from behind it to beat it, had been trialling really well, looks a nice horse, still in for the fight, after covering all that ground and goes down, but goes down with a fair bit of style. That's a horse who's not going to be a maiden very much longer.
There you go. You get to watch that race there and you think, look, and you've probably black booked it because you're actually a smart punter. A lot of people out there smarter than me. Anyway, so that is Carmel, as I said, Brendan Joe Lindsay. And you're right, Jamie said he was very impressed by the run and the horse that's beat it has got huge raps. So that is what we'll try to do each week. We're here because Tiaka Racing look after us and we appreciate that. Mick?
No last race with Tiaka. It's easy and affordable to be involved in New Zealand's champion stable.
We're about to be done.
No. Before we go, just one important thing. Of course, we have lots of people who listen to these things who like both codes and plenty who like greyhounds. Bizarrely, there was a greyhound meeting cancelled today because of some weird viral thing, which wasn't COVID, which is good. Addington Friday night, really, really big harness racing meeting. Self-assured that New Zealand Cup favourite is back. So Sunday Sun, who's the favourite for the Dominion.
Mate, can you tell me what's happening with these bloody harness horses, these favourites for the New Zealand Cup? They can't figure it themselves out. All of a sudden, self-assured's like $1.80 to win the Cup, and then misses out and has bad manners. Then Copy that all of a sudden goes to favourite, then just doesn't run over the top, and then all of a sudden Mark Shard and Scott Phelan's winning at Alex Park. What are you doing? What are these horses doing?
It's been really intriguing because the road to the Cup's been longer, so they've had to hold their form for longer. So usually the road to the Cup is 3 races and you go to the Cup. But these horses are having 4, 5, 6 races. So there's more chances you're going to get beat. So it's exposing more potential chinks. Horses are coming in and out of form. We're still 6 weeks away from the Cup. But Friday night's Addington meeting is every bit as good as Saturday's Hawke's Bay meeting. Every bit of good.
Okay.
Really, really deep.
Sell it to me. Tell me.
$150,000 race for the fillies. And a lot of people who listen to harness racing would say, well, I don't really give a shit. It's a lot of, the All-Stars dominate. Well, they didn't win either of the feature races at Alexandra Park over the last 2 weeks for the big money. They were won by other stables. They don't have the best 3-year-old in the country. They had the best open class horses, but there's enough about them this week of getting the rivals against them. It's a really interesting time in harness racing. After a complete dominance for 5 years, there's more people in play, and that's good for the punters.
I think
good
punters,
meeting Friday night.
I think punters will enjoy that. Hey, so whoever wins this New Zealand Cup, it's going to be some training feat. That's what you're telling me.
It'll be some training feat, but it'll need to be a horse who has the complete package. Manners, obviously the ability to cop 2 miles. It's going to be really intriguing. The other thing too is they have a massive. You're going to be down at Cup Week for the last couple of days.
I can't wait.
Well, they have a massive punters competition, Punter of the Year at Addington on the Friday, and it's proper money.
Is that the free for all?
You're free for all day. So for anybody who likes a bit of harness or is heading to Christchurch, check out addington.co.nz for that sort of stuff. But I don't say this with any bias. I love both codes equally. The meeting on Friday night is every bit as good as what's coming up at Hawke's Bay on Saturday.
Cool. No, that's exciting.
It will be good.
That is good.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's good.
There's a horse there called Sunday Sun. It's $2.30. If it trots all the way, it'll win. So
I was about to say, okay, Mick, you've been doing us well with a couple of little gems you drop in at the end. Is it Sunday Sun where you'd be looking?
Look, at $2.30, I'm willing to back him because if he trots all the way, he'll win. And I think the market's probably skewed. He might start $1.80, but I'm really excited about the weekend. I'm excited about Probabile more than anything else because I love Probile. She's one of my favourites.
Yes.
And I hope she wins the Epsom with some parochialism involved, but also because I just love her as a filly. So I'm hoping that of all the things that happen this weekend, that's the one thing I do hope that we do get is a major New Zealand win in Sydney.
That Epsom is going to be some race because there's a lot of good horses. And a lot of them have drawn the car park. I think Colding, Imaging, Probabile, they're all the 3 widest. And then you've got Star of the Seas, the ace. Then you've got Funstar, who needs to lift, right? Who's been probably not at her best second up stats. A lot of people would have got burnt. They would have backed her. Actually, I know there's people saying mean things about Funstar out there.
I think Probabile, and I've always thought Probabile's a better horse than Funstar. I just think she is. And I think she's got more scope to go further.
You're a great Kiwi, Mick.
No, you know what? I just think Funstar was in the right place at the right time a couple of times last year on the right type of track conditions.
There you go.
Well, I guess we'll find out. So, yeah, good luck to the Lindsays and to everybody involved with Probabile flying the flag because we don't have that many chances of $1 million races there at the moment because we've had a pretty high attrition rate. Bostonian, Catalyst and Melody Bell have gone to Sydney and Dragon Leap and returned with their tails between their legs.
It's tough. And we've also, of course, got the Hawke's Bay Guineas. Need I say more? Very short favourite. There's so much good punting going on. Thanks for listening. This has been No Last Race. That's Mick. I'm Louis. Thank you to Tiako Racing. Toby in the corner. No pizzas this week, but we'll try harder next week. I'm excited. Let's do it.
So am I. And good luck to everybody having a go at your punting competition too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, there you go. All in challenge. Get involved if you haven't already. Thanks, Mick.